yeah, you held the keynote here today, at Republica. So how was it for you?
So exciting. It's such an honor to be here. It is an incredible audience. I mean, people who are thinking about the media, writing about it, doing great empirical research, doing really creative things. So to get a chance to talk to all these folks was fantastic. Yeah.
So what was your keynote about? What did you talk to us?
I was trying to focus on the shift of power from traditional media to big intermediaries like Google, Facebook, etc. Part of my focus was, what is it like when, say, companies that are all concentrated in the US, and in fact one small part of the US, California, have a global power over media in Germany, China, South America, well not China, but Germany, South America, other places around the world. And I think it's very interesting to think about that shift of power away from, say, national media to more centralized intermediaries like Google and Facebook.
So, and what challenges what are the challenges when it comes to intermedia in this context?
So there are huge challenges. I would break them down into 3 parts. The first is you have just flat out fake news that's out there. And that's really troubling because a lot of people are just being misled by stuff that's made up online. The sad thing is that a lot of it all looks the same on Facebook. So it all has the same look and feel as whether it's the Die Zeit or Süddeutsche Zeitung or it's like something that's just made up by some random person. The second thing that I think is really critical here is bias and the ability to manipulate the platform. So people that have a ton of money, they can pay to have search engine optimization, they can pay to have fake Facebook pages that can make someone look really popular or really unpopular, but there's no foundation to that. The third, and I think the most difficult problem, is that a lot of these companies think that human beings are obsolete. So people like me say, you've got to hire journalists, you've got to hire media folks to try to sort through the good and the bad, the valid and the invalid. And they say, no, we just want an algorithm to do that. And this is the big problem because I think there are many aspects of human life that can't be run by robots, by algorithms. And journalism, media is really important.
So you talked, for example, of fake news, and you talked also about platforms that can regulate it. So how can we see what is fake and what is not fake at Facebook or Google or whatever?
Sure. So part of it is that they've got to bring in partners from civil society, from universities, from other areas, who will help them sort the wheat from the chaff, the good from the bad, the true from the fake. I think part of that is going to involve really taking audit logs of where stories come from. So for example, there was a story in the US called Pizzagate. It was entirely made up. But they were able to find out and really confirm that it was made up when they found this very unreliable source behind it. And I think the key is, if we understand the source of media, social media makes it very easy to share, but it's hard to find out who's the ultimate source. And so if we ultimately had a digital public sphere where that was connected and we could see who is the source of the stories that we're looking at, that would be one really big step towards getting rid of fake news.
So, and which influence do you have, like big companies who have the money to influence those algorithms or those news? What's the big problem about it?
I mean, I think that the biggest problem is that they are organizing the public sphere not for democratic accountability, but for profit. And what they have to start realizing is that there's got to be some public values in this. They've got to try to have some public responsibility, corporate responsibility, to make sure that people are seeing what's important and to make sure that the worst examples of fake news don't get out there.
And how can we make sure that these values will stay alive in these contexts, in the intermediaries?
I think part of it is civil society groups putting pressure. So for example, you have a lot of women's rights groups, feminist groups that came in the US and found out that Google was showing ads for lower paying jobs to women than to men. And when they found out about this, and when academics revealed this, they put pressure on them to say, rethink the way they advertise jobs. Similarly, you have lots of minorities that might come in and say, we are being misrepresented or tarred by certain forms of autocomplete results or things like that. You have people who put pressure on Facebook to say, get rid of hate speech. Those are all the civil society angles. When that fails, though, there's definitely a role for media regulation. So the media authorities in Germany, the Media Anstalt, I believe, they have, I think, a definite role to sort of come in and to offer some level of scrutiny to try to get transparency, and in some instances to really shape how the algorithms are working to reflect the public interest.
And when it comes to regulation, how can we make sure that, or how can we regulate, for example, such things without, taking some freedom out of.
One way of thinking about regulation is that you've got a giant government coming in, and it is controlling what a small firm is doing. In general, that is a very big worry. You don't want to have the massive power of the state coming in to overly control, particularly small media entities, right? But when we have large media entities, we've accepted a certain level of, say, must-carry rules. So the cable company can't say, we're not going to take you, because we don't like your politics. They must carry certain channels. There's other right of response, fair reply time that we've had in the broadcast media. Now, that type of rules, those should apply all the stronger to the big intermediaries, right? Because we've got different levels. We could have like a little local newspaper, bigger newspaper, massive TV stations, cable networks, and then when we have above all of those are the intermediaries that are even more powerful. Facebook has 1.3 billion users? At that point, we're not at all in the same category as, say, a newspaper with 100,000 readers. We're talking about orders of magnitude. When we have that big an entity, then freedom really isn't so much at stake. It's just the matter of whose freedom, right? And is it the freedom of the public to shape, to some extent, its public sphere? Or is it the freedom of an uncontrolled intermediary to have completely unaccountable power over that public sphere?
But who decides that? So.
It has to be legislative, it has to be regulatory, it has to be sort of a consultative process. I think that a lot of processes that involve both, I teach administrative law, and what we see in a lot of administrative law, at least in the US context, are agencies that invite in members of civil society to, say, offer comments, to offer comments on comments, to challenge, say, rules that are drawn up, etc. So I think that essentially, the question becomes, yes, there are certainly distortions that can happen once there's regulation, but on the other hand, we already have regulation. It's just regulation done by one or two big companies. And the question is, how do you get to a regulatory situation where there's more input than just the highest managers and engineers at these large American firms?
Let's get a step back again to the intermediaries, for example. What are the big chances for the intermediaries like Facebook or Google? So what do you think personally?
The big chances for?
So for using them or for us as user.
Oh yes, so there's a positive side, certainly. So certainly on the positive side, I just heard someone from Google Deutschland, who was just sort of saying that he has a really strong belief that it used to be that you would need €1 million to start a TV station or something. Now on the YouTube, you can just put up your own YouTube. That is great. But we have to balance it by the fact that I would say if you go on almost any political content on YouTube, if you look at the bar down the side of suggested videos, within 4 or 5 clicks, you're probably going to be on some very scary conspiracy theories. So the question is, you have to balance the opportunity for freedom of speech and expression by individuals, that's great, with the abuse of that. And on some level, by controlling the abuse of that, or by limiting the abuse of that, you are actually enhancing the freedom of expression of individuals who are not abusing that opportunity.
So I heard from this thing that Facebook gives you some trailers from it was a movie that has like 2 or 3 trailers, and Facebook gave you this trailer in your newsfeed, when it's thought whether you are on which ethnicity you are.
Yes, that's right.
So what's the biggest problem about this when Facebook thinks you are someone and gives you like movie trailers or interests that you might love, but it's not sure that you do it?
I'll give 2 examples of the problems this can cause. One is, I think with movie trailers, I don't worry so much because I just sort of feel, movies, may have different sort of angle for different groups, that's fine. But in Michigan, in the US presidential election in 2016, there is reporting that there were ads targeted to African American communities that highlighted Hillary Clinton's comments in the 90s calling certain youth gangs super predators, right? And so the implication of this was that clearly it would be worse for those African American groups if Hillary Clinton was elected. I mean, it's obviously the fact that it was not worse for them if she would be elected. They now face one of the most race-insensitive departments of justice they've ever seen. So this is a huge problem, and it would have been easier to discredit that if you had very clear indication of the source of those types of ads.
Yeah.
That's one thing. The second that I think is really critical is that with respect to, for example, loans or colleges, it's been shown that in a lot of minority communities, they are seeing loans that are predatory, high interest rate loans, and they're seeing for-profit colleges that are very troubling. So that is a very troubling thing. So yes, so that I think is the real problem, is that when you have targeting based on ethnicity that is really predatory targeting, harmful targeting, we have to take a stance against that. We have to be able to monitor it and to regulate it.
So maybe a positive word to the end. What was your favorite part of the media convention?
Yes, I would say...
So back to the media convention.
My favorite, I have two favorite parts I have to say. One was the researchers from Serbia who were in the inaugural presentation, who mapped the social network of the people that run Facebook. So on some level, Facebook knows all of our social networks. They know who's our friends, who we don't like, who we block, who we always are lurking on Facebook, for example. They know that. So to have researchers map the Facebook's own managers' social networks is fascinating. The second I would say is Professor Natalie Hellberger does amazing research, and she was able to present some of that today with respect to how algorithmic public spheres work. And I think the more that we pay attention to these empirical researchers, she actually has 1,000 volunteers that allow all of their Facebook activity to be monitored, and so she's learned enormously from that, and she's teaching us all here.
So we have seen that maybe. So thank you very much for the interview, and wir sind zurück auf den Bühnen und viel Spaß dabei auf jeden Fall.